Joining us on the line right now, Bill Kristol with the Weekly Standard, political commentator, all-around nice guy. How are you, Bill?
Fine. How are you guys?
We're doing very good. Okay, let's get to this Bowe Bergdahl mess that everybody's talking about. First of all, let's just talk about it from a political standpoint. Were you surprised that the administration apparently was caught completely flat-footed, that they actually thought that when they came out into the Rose Garden and they threw this little dog and pony show, and then when they sent Susan Rice out on the Sunday talk shows to describe Bowe Bergdahl as a man, a hero, a man who had served his country with distinction, they seemed sort of surprised at the backlash. Do you think they were just caught completely unaware? Did they just have no sense of it whatsoever?
I think they think they've gotten away with PR spin quite a lot of times in the past, a fairly simple spin. You know, he served his country, and now we're bringing him home. And if you're critical of that, you don't care about American soldiers who are in captivity overseas, or you're leaving people on the battlefield. And maybe they just thought no one would actually research his background or the circumstances of the Taliban guys who were sending back. So, I mean, in retrospect, it looks like how could they have made this mistake? But I'll say this: I was on this week with George Stephanopoulos Sunday morning, and the consensus of people just chatting before the show and afterwards, I think George asked me this. He said, aren't Republicans taking a risk by being critical of this deal? I mean, the early take on it was, you know, it's kind of risky to be criticizing the return of a soldier. So I think that's what the administration thought they could get away with, hide, in effect, behind the parents and behind the soldier. That is clearly what the president and Susan Rice, in my view, were doing Saturday and Sunday. It ended up, I think it didn't work.
Well, and Bill Kristol, it
didn't work, incidentally. It didn't work because the soldiers.
Yes.
The soldiers. I mean, I know how many emails I got Saturday night and Sunday, and I can only imagine people who were even more plugged into that community, the kind of email traffic and Facebook posting as there were, of people saying, wait a second, wait a second, I fought over there, and my buddies who fought over there, and let's take a distinction between people who fought and some of them were wounded and died, and this guy Bergdahl. And that really, I think they didn't, that was a genuine upsurge from the grassroots.
Yeah, I agree. And listen, it took a couple of days for that narrative to roll out. But the very first narrative that I think raised a lot of eyebrows was the price that was paid for Sergeant Bergdahl. I mean, I've heard people say he could be a Medal of Honor winner, but you don't give up these five guys. They've been called the Taliban Dream Team. Let's focus on that part for a moment. Do we have any assurances at all that these guys can't pretty much immediately come back and turn their sights back on the American people for another terror attack?
Well, I guess we have some assurance that they're in Qatar for a year. But, no, you're right. I think that's the policy question, which I would have still raised, as you say, whoever Bergdahl was, and I think it's a very legitimate doubt to be raised. I think that would have been a more even debate for the administration to have. They might have said, oh, well, we have some secret agreements, too, and these guys have been out of the fight for 5 years now, or 10 years. How much damage could they do? You know, they might have been able to sustain that. But look, that's a huge problem, and this president is determined to close Gitmo. There are 140 other people, somewhat like those five guys, stuck there. They're really the worst of the worst at this point. And the idea that we can just say, hey, the war's over. I don't really know what the war in Afghanistan. I guess our part in it is going to be over in 2 years. It's not over now. And that's nothing that offended people. The president, well, the war's over. We've got to get rid of, do these exchanges. Really, tell the 32,000 troops over there that the war's over.
All right. So now, look, we've got this mess on our hands now with Congress because a lot of people apparently were asked about this. Hypothetically, they went and said, well, what if we traded these five guys for Bergdahl? And they were told unilaterally on two occasions, I am told, very strongly, no, that's a stupid idea. And so then they have this law in effect that says if you're going to do something like this, you've got to give us 30 days notice. They didn't give 30 days notice, and they make this sort of thin-reed argument that, well, we didn't. His health seemed to be deteriorating. We had to move quickly. We didn't have time to go back to Congress. I would submit to you they didn't want to go back to Congress as they knew what Congress was going to say.
Yeah, totally. There may have been some sense of urgency and secrecy, obviously. And I think it's a constitutional matter. The president may have the prerogative to do this as commander-in-chief. But, the health argument, which they sort of trotted out opportunistically, seems not to be, he might have been in not great health, but there's no sense that there was an imminent medical emergency. And I think they backed off, if you look at their comments to the senators last night on the health claim. So de-emphasized it. So, look, this isn't a ministry. I hate to say this, but I think it's been proven time and time again in foreign policy and in domestic policy, but it's more serious and more offensive, really, in foreign policy. they'll reach for any argument they think will work, and and they'll try to, in effect, shut up their critics by saying, the guy was, in effect, the guy's in horrible health, or the guy you don't know, or you don't care about soldiers overseas, or whatever. I mean, that's really the depth to which they've kind of been reduced in making this argument. If it was just a policy argument, I don't think it would be a great argument that they would have, but they might be able to sustain that. But because they wanted to wrap themselves in the parents and in the soldier and get the kind of PR benefit out of this, that's what I think offends people. I've been talking to a lot of people about it, and a lot of people just feel there's something wrong, and you push them, and it's not exactly the policy choice, which they're not happy about, but which they can imagine the president making. It's the wrapping of himself in with the parents. But why was that necessary? You put out a statement. We made an exchange. It was a tough thing to do. You hate giving up sending these guys back from Gitmo, but we thought it was the right thing to do. We thought there might not be another opportunity later on, and we did it. Thank you, goodbye. Questions will be taken by the Defense Department as we, go about in a very methodical way, go about debriefing, Sergeant, Bergdahl. I mean, that'll be the way you do it, right? I mean, not wrap yourself to the parents, not have Susan Rice on the show opining falsely. Presumably she knew it was false about his character as a soldier.
Yeah, and you talk about that Rose Garden moment, Bill Kristol, and it occurred to me this president has given out the Medal of Honor to members of the military, and he's never had them in the Rose Garden. He's never allowed those parents to speak to the world about how great their child is. These are the only. You could argue that these are the most honored parents of a soldier during this Obama administration, given that moment that they were able to have.
Yeah, that may be, and I suppose, you could say, well, he's a sympathetic figure, and they suffered for 5 years, but I heard from other people who lost children, and lost soldiers and Marines.
Well, they're their children. They're still children to their mom and dad.
I mean, we shouldn't think of those children. They're soldiers and Marines, but yeah, they are their children. And, it's not that they wanted to go stand in the Rose Garden either, and they, but there's a sense of really this is the one set of parents who are highlighted above all else. It also does fit into a bit of a narrative, therefore, of the soldiers and Marines as kind of victims, and I think there are a lot of ways in which it fit into other things the administration has done in terms of the military that rubbed the military community the wrong way. But however that may be, the core problem was him having the parents there, and then Susan Rice not telling the truth on Sunday morning. And it would be nice if she apologized for that, incidentally. I mean, she's like walking around somewhere, as we know. She's available. She can have the press into her office. Couldn't she just say, you know what, I'm sorry that I inadvertently misled people on Sunday morning. I shouldn't have said what I said. Would that be so hard for her to do?
Well, she'd have to do it for a lot of things she said before already, wouldn't she?
Maybe, but this is a particularly appalling thing.
It really is.
Flat out, straight, 180 degrees wrong,
All right, Bill Kristol, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining us this morning. Greatly appreciated.
My pleasure.